Welcome to Terror in Tandem, a podcast about finding entertainment in the macabre, hosted by the knowledgeable and lovable Laura and Richard Mathiasen. Each episode, we discuss the horror genre, from books to film to TV and beyond, sometimes even from the beyond. You can find us online at terrorintandem.com and on Instagram at terrorintandem.
But enough about me.
But enough about me.
Let's talk about what we're going to talk about.
Oh, really?
What are
Hi,
we?
everyone.
Oh, hi.
Welcome.
You
always either jump right in or won't ever jump out.
I'm like that in real life. No salutations for me. I just jump right into a group of people and start talking about, alternate universes. And
let's say hi to our engineer.
Hello.
Bruce, on the other side of the glass.
He's just waving his hands through the air like Minority Report style. It's one of those hologram computers.
What is it, Bruce?
It's like Iron Man.
Oh, he keeps pointing to his wrist, his watch, get on with it.
Get on with what?
What are you talking about, Bruce?
Mind your Bruce,
I don't understand. Oh, right. I think that we only have the studio for another 45 minutes.
Oh, you know what? I just bought the studio.
Oh, awesome. Well,
yeah. Now we've got it forever. You know what?
Now we have
Bruce?
now we have a new property. Bruce,
get out.
1, 2, 3.
I'm not saying that line. Yeah, it's been forever ruined.
Right. Well, I was going to say
you're
get out.
terminated.
I'll be back.
Oh, God.
Bruce,
I was hoping you weren't going to go there.
Bruce. I mean,
straight
listen,
to the
Bruce, you're not supposed to
Schwarzenegger.
speak. Bruce, get out.
Yeah.
Pack your things and leave.
Get out. Get out!
Wow, that was loud.
It was.
Very loud.
I mean, we'll see.
So, hi.
Hello.
Oh, now that we're Bruceless.
I guess I've got to learn how to do this.
Bruce. What are we going to talk about today?
I think we should talk about
famous Bruces.
creatures of the night, also known as Wampyr.
Yes, vampires.
Vampires not named Dracula.
Right. We're not going to talk about Dracula. Dracula's going to get his own episode.
Dracula's got their own thing going. It's a lot. We're going to dedicate a full episode to it. This is following a pattern that I've noticed in listening back to these episodes where you say a thing and then I say that exact same thing, just using slightly
multiple
different words.
times.
Yeah.
Everyone, we're sorry for Richard Repeater.
Well, wherever you find my wife's successful coattails, you'll find me clinging on for dear life.
Well, now there's a free coattail because Bruce is let go of the other one.
I did want to talk to you about how many of your outfits involve coattails.
Yeah.
It is bizarre.
Well, it's very Victorian of me.
It's a statement for sure.
Yeah. I mean, my gold buttons.
Yeah.
And the coattails. It's really because I have to drag you along.
It's true.
In life.
It's true. Yeah.
And
I do appreciate the comfy coattails.
Drag you by the tooth back to vampires.
Nice.
That's what we're talking about today, audience.
Look at that. That was full circle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about vampires. What are they? Where'd they come from? Why are we scared of them? And
where our favorite vampires came up in pop culture.
Exactly. So I think you had a special surprise to get us started.
I do. Audience and my co-host Richard.
Hello.
I'm a vampire.
What?
Surprise.
Oh, God.
That's why I like to sleep so much.
That's why I'm always so tired and have those marks on my neck.
Exactly. I am fully on blood right now. So, no, what I was hoping to sort of talk about before we get into the fictional aspect or folktale aspect of vampires.
Hold up. I was hoping it was all going to be fictional.
No, I'm going to actually talk about just some research I did. There are humans that identify as vampires. Huh. This is true. This is real life. This is happening now. there are folks out there and listeners. If you are identifying as a vampire, welcome.
And if
I'm sure you're listening to this at, dusk.
If you're watching the live stream, you'll see the Terror in Tandem breaking news banner going across.
Bruce, we told you to get out.
Seriously, we're going to have to hire security and then call them.
Yeah. So don't make me get my fangs out, Bruce. So I wanted to talk about this book called Vampires Today: The Truth About Modern Vampirism. It's from 2009, written by Joseph Laycox.
Okay.
He investigated humans who claim to feed off of the energy of others, and some that every now and then also drink blood. So I don't want to confuse this with lifestyle vampires, people who merely admire the, vampire pop culture.
Like cosplayers?
Well, yeah, like visual aesthetics or cultural aesthetic, entertainment, wear costume, wear fake fangs. Yeah, those are people who, really get into it or play around with it.
But it's just a hobby. They're not.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a difference between people who kind of like LARP as vampires and who actually subscribe to a lifestyle of vampirism. Wow.
These people call themselves vampires.
All right.
They believe that their physical, mental, and spiritual health will deteriorate if they don't feed on energy. So,
okay. I mean, I feel like that describes any living thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, but there's sanguinarian vampires.
I'm guessing that's the blood type.
Yes, they feed off of human blood, like
Ugh.
a few drops.
Oh, okay.
Very little. They use a syringe or a lancet because they don't believe that feeding off of somebody's, physical body is sanitary. And
They'd be
it's
right
often
about that.
Painful for the person.
I'd say often, yeah.
Yeah.
Often
So
is.
it's usually not
You're going to feel a little prick.
biting somebody and sucking the blood from them. It's
I get
taking
it.
blood as a way to maintain your physical and mental and emotional
when
energy.
Angelina Jolie and
Yeah,
Billy
they
Bob
wore
Thornton
blood.
wore each
Mhm.
other's blood in
Yeah.
like amulets.
Mm-hmm.
That was a thing.
Yeah, it was. She also really deep kissed her brother on the red carpet.
Yeah, I mean, let's stay on vampires.
So that's the first type, sanguinarian. The second type is a psychic vampire. Honestly, I feel like this one was the most, I don't know, the most visceral. I know that tasting somebody else's blood, but this psychic vampire believe that people have auras that they can see. I mean, I know that psychics believe they can see auras. Some people who are really spiritually grounded can see auras, and that's a beautiful thing. The psychic vampires believe they can see auras and energy chakras, and then they use a tentacle that they can see, that no one else can see, but they can see. They attach the tentacle to the aura of other people, and they suck the energy from that aura into their person.
Like a psychic mosquito.
Well,
I've definitely worked with psychic vampires.
I mean, it's just a practice.
I've definitely dated psychic vampires.
This psychic vampirism has been part of the occult since the 19th century. And energy borrowing is common throughout Asia.
Huh.
There are, like I said, there's unseen tentacles and auras all over the place, and only mystics believe these can really be seen by psychic vampires. They usually feed in large crowds and do so with consenting adults, consenting others.
I mean, like, you ever run into those people that you can't believe
You're exhausted after spending time with them?
Or you can't believe where they get all their energy from? You're
Yeah.
like, my God, how do they do all of this?
There's also a branch of psychic vampires called a practice by psychic vampires called tantric feeding, which uses sex to siphon the energy.
I'll bet.
So that tentacle.
Somebody warned Sting.
Everyone could see that tentacle.
He is like an endless meal to these tantric vampires.
And then
golden
look at
sumner.
those fields of gold.
I've had an orgasm.
Oh,
for
maybe
40
Fields
years.
of Gold was about all the people at his concerts with the gold energy.
I'm just gonna
He's
say,
like, oh my God, that's Fields of Gold right there. That's what he calls his attendees at his concerts. He's like, I'm going to feed off of everybody.
get your invisible tentacles out of my chakras, you goddamn vampires.
So, and then the third and final type of vampire, modern vampire,
That
is a
we know
hybrid.
of.
Right, is a hybrid. So it's a combination of a psychic and a sanguinarian. There are also lesser known energy workers, like energy. They do energy work.
Yeah.
Called psionics. It starts with a P.
Yeah. It's like
Silent P.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I get it.
These real vampires don't believe in immortality.
I mean, I can kind of see a sort of beneficial practice to redirecting people's energies, taking a safe amount of energy from someone with a lot of it, giving it to somebody who's flagging.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Sure. I mean, listen, I don't think that this is intended for physical harm or physical depletion of another.
Mm-hmm.
It's a way for them to survive.
It's actually an interesting reflection on community, on groups of people aiding each other.
Yeah.
Living in symbiosis.
It's interesting that you brought up community because there's the Atlanta Vampire Alliance.
The what?
Atlanta Vampire Alliance.
Okay.
And it's one of the largest vampire collections of community in North America.
Atlanta's getting its freak on.
I'm not sure how up to date the alliance is. It looked like the only information I could find was up to 2000, the year 2020. Sorry, 2020. Okay. So there may have been COVID related concerns of
you don't want to drink Omicron blood.
Sure, but they were founded in August of 2005, and they have a mission statement, which I summarized.
Is it to drink blood?
Vampires are humans who cannot sustain their own physical, mental, or spiritual well-being.
Oh, that's...
They need to consume blood or life force energy from another human. Without feeding this way, the vampire will become lethargic, depressed, and suffer physically. The mission is to promote unity in the Atlanta, Georgia area between the real vampire community and the rest of the community. They welcome sanguinarian and psychic vampires and do not criticize others' houses, orders, or paths, but remain neutral to those who want to belong to the AVA.
I mean...
So it's a welcoming community.
Sounds kind of dope, actually.
Yeah. I mean, and so a lot of vampire communities are considered a house. I mean, the AVA is also considered a house. But they don't have the social hierarchy
like
that
Vampire the Masquerade.
Correct.
Yeah, for sure.
They don't have exclusionary practices. They hold socials. They're not religious, spiritual, or the occult. So they're just a community of like-minded vampires.
Everybody needs a community.
Sure.
But do you think they would be into my business idea? CBD, cannabis blood dispensary. It's just blood-infused medical marijuana for stoner vampires.
So I thought we could go through, move into the fictional vampire tropes.
Okay. That sounds good.
What you all may be familiar with as far as the types of vampires that are in fiction throughout time.
Okay.
The first trope that I want to talk about is vampires as the undead.
The undead.
Yeah. Again, we did speak about what a human vampire needs. And the same is true for vampires as undead. They need blood or else they're going to grow weak, insane, or die.
Mm-hmm.
Vampire, like how they become this is usually a human will be infected, almost like a virus from another vampire creature. Either it's a bat or an animal that might be a vampire, or an actual fictional vampire person that bites them, infects their blood, and they die.
Okay.
They're dead. And in order for them to come back as vampires, they have to drink the blood of whoever infected them.
It really all comes from Dracula. It comes from the novel Dracula. The idea of a blood-drinking undead vampire that has supernatural powers and weaknesses that are pretty unique to a Judeo-Christian society. It's weak against the cross and holy water, but it's also weak against more folklorish types of things like wooden stakes and garlic and things like that.
Couldn't we argue that Jesus was the first vampire?
Or the first zombie.
Right.
But no, he had already risen Lazarus, so he wasn't the first. So the way that vampires are created in Dracula, it's not so much
talking about Dracula.
Yeah, but like that's where all of these myths come from. So
Okay.
the way that the sort of classical European style vampire is created, it's not that everything the vampire feeds on turns into another vampire. They drain their victim, and then when the victim's drained, they before they die, they feed on the blood of the vampire that drained them, which is called their sire.
Only if they want to
Yes.
keep that person.
Otherwise,
or
they just
turn
die.
that person to a vampire.
If a vampire like this drains you and doesn't feed you its
Yeah.
own blood, then you just die.
And that
So
happens a lot.
Then you go through a sort of like, sleeping period where you turn, that you get put in a coffin, and that's very Catholic and Christian, like the 3 days and then the resurrection. But this is the sort of dark version of that where you resurrect as a vampire.
Or sometimes they just turn them into servants.
Yeah.
They
It
might not
depends.
turn them into vampires.
There
They
are
might
some
just
myths
feed off of them.
where you're, subservient, where you're like a thrall.
Or a familiar.
Yeah. A familiar is more a human that is under the sway of a vampire but hasn't been turned.
Right. Sometimes they
Yeah.
use them to feed off of, though, is what I mean. Instead of turning them, they just feed off of them.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So
They're like a blood bag for them.
that's like the classic Count style of vampire. But then there's also like the plague style that you were getting into, which
The
is
viral.
Yeah, viral. You get bit, you turn, no matter what. It's spread like rabies.
Yeah.
So that's something like the 2009 film Daybreakers was more like treated like a plague. And I think that probably has its roots in some actual diseases that affect the blood, like anemia, having a low blood count, porphyria, which can cause, pale skin and aversion to the sun, things like that.
Yeah, and not all vampires in fiction feed off of humans. A lot feed off of animals only.
Yeah, it's usually,
Or they like steal blood.
it's usually depicted like animal blood isn't as good as
Right.
human blood. Like human blood is the champagne of blood.
Yeah.
It's the Miller High Life of blood.
Miller High Life, though, if you want to sponsor, we do quite enjoy a Miller High Life.
No, we don't. I mean, yuck. I'm over 16. I can drink something else.
But if they want to sponsor the podcast,
Love it
that's
so
what I'm saying. That's what.
much.
See, there you are.
Did I just blow it with Miller?
I mean, yes.
There's still Budweiser. Any alcohol, really.
Speaking of alcohol, though, sometimes in fiction, the metaphor of being a vampire sometimes is a reference to alcoholism.
Oh yeah,
or drug
and
abuse.
withdrawal. Yeah,
Correct.
Yeah, there are. Anne Rice does
Like
this
that
a lot
dependency.
in her Vampire Chronicles novels, like Lestat and Interview with the Vampire, where drinking blood is they get intoxicated, and there's a sexual fulfillment to it as well, where it's not just feeding for them. It's like it's an experience.
It's like tantric.
Yeah. And some of them treat it as sacred, some of them treat it as sexual. but it's more than just the nutritional aspect
Right.
of it, if that's the right word.
So another trope is vampires, as you mentioned with Anne Rice, vampires as seductive or sexy vampires.
Oh, yeah.
They can manipulate others with their mind.
Oh, yes, it's vampire night.
Examples of this are, shows like Vampire Diaries or True Blood.
Yeah.
That was
True Blood.
very
It's
sexual.
like
charge.
90% sex, 10%
All these
vampires.
beautiful, amazing looking in their prime,
It's,
only
and by
good
the way,
looking
we drink
vampires.
blood. Yeah.
What's that?
Oh, and by the way, we also drink blood.
Yeah, exactly.
In between fucking.
Look at our abs.
Abs and blood.
Yeah. Look at our abs. And now look at our beautiful white smile. I'm going to drink your blood real quick. Thanks. Yeah. Before we do it.
Sexy vampires.
Yeah, sexy vampires. Another trope that you mentioned is that sunlight is toxic. Twilight famously sort of spun this into sparkling. They were sparkling in the sun.
Well, so
which sort of didn't, they allowed them to be out in the light, not bursting into flames.
For most vampires that we're familiar with, they only come out at night. They're nocturnal creatures, and they die in the sun. It's usually depicted as them burning or exploding, something like that. So,
Let the Right One in the film
in
represented
Twilight
that really well.
Mm-hmm, it did in the hospital scene.
Mm-hmm.
So in stuff like Blade, he's the day walker, where Blade can go out in the sun, where other vampires can't. But in Twilight, they go out in the sun and they just sort of twinkle.
Yeah.
But they also, I remember those movies, like every scene was gray.
Yes.
I don't know if there was like a sunny day. I know it took place in the Pacific Northwest.
Right. Like in like the Oregon area.
Yeah.
Also, they have no reflection. That's another common aspect of vampires. Mm-hmm. No reflection.
Yeah. And that usually stems from the idea that the vampire would be, if you presented them with an image of themselves, they would be horrified that some part of their humanity might remember what they used to be, or they would be, averse to the monster that they are. So a lot of times it's just depicted as them having no reflection at all.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You mentioned shape-shifting, so vampires as shape-shifters.
Shape-shifting's a big, big part of it, especially in the ancient tales.
And especially into bats, shape-shifting into bats. Bat. Vampires have fangs. That's another one. I mean, there's a lot of different representations of vampires' monstrous mouth.
Yeah.
In, I can think, what is it? 30 Days of Night.
Well, now you're getting into the other kind of vampire, which is what I would call the monstrous vampire. The one that doesn't look, like a sexy pale.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely like a
Eastern
fanged
European
vampire.
Yeah, 30 Days of Night is a great example. That was an incredible comic by Steve Niles and Ben Templesmith. Ben Templesmith's art is very distinct. But the movie version, Danny Houston was the lead vampire in that, and yeah, he was monstrous looking, mm-hmm. big, fangs that are too big for your mouth, and features that are distinctly alien and non-human.
One of my later recommendations is going to talk about how frightening those non-traditional, just fangs from your regular smile vampires, yeah. the monstrous mouth. And then finally, I just wanted to talk about, the illusion that, or the trope that you can repel vampires using garlic, crosses, or holy water, and also that a stake through the heart will kill them. So those are the big, in my experience, the big fictional vampire tropes that are,
like if
common understanding.
If we were suddenly confronted with vampires in our life right now, those are the things we would go to.
Right.
Stake through the heart, holy water, that kind of shit.
Yeah, being invited in your house.
I mean, a lot of that, the garlic, the the wood,
Cross.
specific types of wood like ash wood. That's old. That's old, Slavic folk tales.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, it's co-opted by Christianity, and you get the stuff like the cross and the holy water
Mm-hmm.
and burying in consecrated ground and all that kind of stuff. And it's interesting how the myths evolve.
Yeah.
But I guess like everything in horror, there's a different kind of vampire for whatever taste you have. You want some twinkly, sexy vampires that are just really sad about the fact that they'll have perfect abs for eternity?
Yeah.
Watch Twilight.
Do you want like vampires, that you could become one easily and
check out
still
the
live
Atlanta Vampire Association.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to take a quick break?
Why not?
Okay.
Do we have any vampiric sponsors? I guess we'll see.
I don't know.
All right.
Let's see.
Let's do it.
Yeah, that was. Got to get out the old checkbook for that one.
Get your Bitcoin and your Ethereums.
So welcome back.
Welcome back
to Vamps.
To Wampyrs.
So those are the traditional ideals in our North American and some international.
No, actually,
ideals.
That's European.
Yeah,
for
European.
Sure. So I am going to get into a little bit about vampires outside of the Count Dracula Eastern European style
Count Chocula.
that we're all familiar with.
Wait, before you do that, I really do have a question. This is a legitimate question. Is the concept that Count Chocula feeds on chocolate to stay alive?
Oh no, he feeds on children. Yeah, he just sells cereal.
He's like, there's a drop of blood in every bowl.
Yeah, so like Count Chocula's money dried up. He's been around for centuries and he made some bad investments. So, he sells cereal now to keep things going.
There's a drop of blood in every bowl.
But he definitely eats baby
and so
children.
That entices the children. Then he waits until they're full.
And he really likes sweet blood, so he sells really sugary cereals to beef up his prey.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought everyone knew this.
Glucose.
This is open. It's an open secret.
I thought he fed off of chocolate.
Then why would he give it away? So everybody knows, I'd say in our audience, that European style vampire, but the idea of a shapeshifter, a blood drinker, an essence taker, is ubiquitous and it's ancient. It's always been around. And it has spread as culture has spread through trade, through war, through sailors and shipping and things like that. But also these myths have sometimes developed independently from each other at different ends of the earth because humanity, is humanity. We
similarly when we're talking about the sea monsters.
Exactly.
It's like maybe a misunderstanding or a wondering like what that mysterious stranger is all about, and you make sort of a folk tale or folklore story about it.
So some of the earliest representations of what we would think of as maybe a vampire are not exactly the same as like the Count Dracula type, but we have the ancient Mesopotamian monster known as the Lamashtu, which was an evil demoness that harassed mothers during childbirth, which low blow. Like, seriously? That is...
During childbirth?
Yeah, they're already going through a lot.
There's a lot of blood there.
It would also steal... Exactly. It would also steal babies while they were nursing. So...
So the original Count Chocula, according to your lore.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And we'll just wait for a cease and desist from General Mills. Now, ironically enough, the ancient Sumerians and Babylonians would pray to Pazuzu, who was the god of famine.
You always call me Pazuzu.
Well, in order to fight off Lamashtu, now Pazuzu was the demon that possessed Regan in The Exorcist.
Oh.
It was a real deity from Mesopotamia and Babylon, but it's Lamashtu. Based on the Judeo-Christian mythology, we've got Lilith, who
she's badass.
Well, she was cut out of the King James Bible, but she's still in earlier versions and in the Talmud. Lilith was the original wife of Adam. I mean, talk about being divorced.
Adam and Eve?
Written out of history. Yeah. Before Eve was Lilith. And Lilith...
Wait a minute. Why? Well, what's the truth?
Okay. So the truth is none of this happened because humanity didn't start with two naked people in a paradise garden.
No, let's not.
So
we got to cut this out.
No.
I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there.
I think it's okay if we deny creationism as going there. But so the original story... Now, the King James Bible was assembled by King James. So that didn't come until the Middle Ages. So in the Talmud and some of the original books of the Bible that weren't included, Lilith was the original wife of Adam. So she was the first woman.
So Eve is the other lady.
Eve was the second wife.
The original other woman.
Yes.
Huh.
Now, Lilith was expelled from the Garden of Eden for disobeying Adam, or just not doing what he said. And her punishment for...
First feminist.
Interesting you should say that. I'll get into that in a moment. So Lilith was banished from the Garden of Eden and became the mother of monsters. It was later on in the Middle Ages when, monks sitting in their monasteries, having never seen a woman in their lives, were writing morality tales based on Lilith. Because she didn't obey her husband, that means she was the mother of monsters.
Do you know mother of monsters is mom?
It is. That's the acronym MOM, Mother
Yeah.
of Monsters. Yeah, exactly. I hope that's where it comes from. So lately, though, in modern times, she has been co-opted by modern feminist movements, especially amongst modern Satanists, who are not so much into what medieval monks would call a Satanist, worshiping the devil and conjuring demons and all that shit. They're mostly, I would say a social and political movement at this point. But Lilith is very popular as a symbol of defiance of the patriarchy. And, of the unfair punishments levied on women who dare to do so. So real quick, I just want to mention a few more. There's the Jewish Aluka, which is Hebrew for horse leech. It's a kind of vampire mentioned in ancient texts. There's the...
it's interesting because leeches suck blood, so...
Yep. Well, there's the chupacabra of Mexico, which is Spanish for goat sucker.
Afraid of that.
That's actually
coattail sucker, like you?
Goat sucker.
Oh, darn it. I thought you said coattail sucker.
No. That literally chupacabra means goat sucker. So that's like a little gremlin type thing that sucks the blood of goats and steals babies. It's actually not an old myth. It was popularized in the 1990s. There's one of my favorites, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, the Sukoyan, which is the vampire of the Caribbean. Now, this myth pops up in Trinidad, Tobago, the Bahamas. this Kuyant was an old, like a withered old lady that at night would take off all her skin and put it in a mortar. And in her true form of a ball of fire, would seek out her victims to suck their blood. And the only way to kill a Sequoiant was to find the mortar where they kept their skin and pour salt in it.
Whoa.
Which would dry
like
up their skin.
Slug.
Yeah, it's awesome, right? So
That's
one thing about the
scary.
Sequoiant, though, is you could slow them down if you threw a bunch of rice on the ground, because they are compelled at that moment to stop what they're doing and count every grain of rice. They have like OCD about rice. This has come up recently. The writers of one of my favorite shows, our favorite shows, What We Do in the Shadows.
Oh, yes.
They have mentioned that the OCD rice counting thing is a trope they have tried to write into the show but haven't found a spot for it yet, because it's like one of their favorite weird old vampire stories.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
Wow.
if you're being chased by a vampire and you've got nothing else, throw some rice on the ground. Maybe they'll stop and count it and you can get away.
Maybe.
But I want to end my world tour of vampirism with one of the coolest and possibly more well-known ones, the Jiangshi of China. Now, that is the hopping vampire. Now, the hopping vampire is distinctive in that it's dressed in the robes of the Qing dynasty. So it's like 18th century China. So, you know, those silken long robes with the long sleeves.
Do they have a mask?
No, they have white faces.
Okay.
Like painted white kind of face. And they hop. They don't walk. They hop up and down. And they drink blood. They lure people into the woods. They are, you know, created by dead spirits that are that have too much yang qi, too much dark energy. They're possessed. Now you can fight them with wood from a peach tree, and the reason peach wood is sacred because it's thought to contain all 5 of the elements, which are fire, wood, earth, metal, and water. You can fight them with mirrors because they can't stand the look of their own image.
So they can see themselves.
They can. And you can fight them with like sacred rice and stuff like that.
So
blessed,
the rice
blessed by a villager.
Same thing?
Blessed by like a
Do they
like
have
a,
to
a
stop
shaman.
and count it? Or
No.
they just-
It just hurts them.
Oh, like little pellets.
So the one possible origin of the Jiangshi, of the hopping vampire, was Taoist monks would travel to rural villages that didn't have their own graveyards or anything like that, and they would collect the dead. And so 2 monks would put 2 bamboo poles on their shoulders and carry them like lengthwise between them. They would prop up the dead by their arms onto the bamboo poles and
so
then
it would
walk.
look like they were walking?
So and they would keep their heads down out of respect. So in the dark, you would see these dead bodies held upright, and it looked like they were bobbing because of the footsteps of the monks who were holding the poles.
Whoa.
And they were dressed in funeral clothes, you know, just like their best outfit, so in robes. And it was thought to be bad luck to look at them, but so it gave them like...
To like look too closely.
It made them look scary, but if you looked at them in the distance, you wouldn't see the monks carrying them because they were wearing dark clothing, but you would see these pale, robed things, you know, moving in sort of a hopping manner. So that's one possible origin of the Jiangshi. Another possible origin is that smugglers made up the stories to keep people away from their smuggling routes.
Right.
That's
Like,
equally,
don't look too closely because
Yeah.
you're going to rat us out.
Exactly. Like don't go into this part of the province because there are hopping vampires there, when really they're just moving opium or whatever.
Has there ever been a visual representation?
Yes, there are. There's a whole
This
genre
that
of...
wasn't a setup at all either.
I know, right? There's a whole genre of Jiangshi vampire films. Probably the most famous being the Mr. Vampire series. I've actually seen one called this 2013 film called Rigor Mortis, which had a Jiangshi in it. It's a pretty good movie. It was like about an apartment building that's got a whole bunch of supernatural stuff going on, but there was a Jiangshi that was featured in it. But the most prominently I've ever seen it was in the video game Sleeping Dogs, which is an awesome game. There's a definitive version of it on PS4 and Xbox One. There was a DLC for it that had Jiangshi invading Hong Kong, and you just have to, you know, kick and punch them. So, yeah, the cool thing about that is it's just it shows you that from China to North America to Europe, there was a common fear that seems to center around beings that could alter their form, that lured people away, as a way to like we talked about in the Sea Monsters episode, as a way to explain things like, well, why did so-and-so go missing and we never saw them again?
Yeah, the unknown.
A lamia, was in the woods and lured them away.
Give answers to something that might not have answers.
I think pretty early on, humans realized that if you lose too much blood, you die.
Mm-hmm.
So blood became the life essence. Life force. So that it's, makes perfect sense that a villain of humanity would feed off your life force. And these things seem to go after babies and horny men, mostly. So horny men and babies.
Yeah, wow.
Watch out.
They're everywhere.
And goats.
I mean, horny men make babies, so I feel like it's an endless twist of fate. Well, that's fascinating. I mean, I'm definitely interested in seeing a lot of, especially if what we do in the shadows can pull that, rice throwing aspect off. Yeah. If anybody can, they can.
I don't know if we're going to talk about that in our recommendations.
I mean, I think we're going to mention it.
But it's just if you're a little sick of vampires, because let's face it, they're pretty heavily represented in pop culture. What you might be growing weary of is just one interpretation of the vampire. Mm-hmm. Check out some foreign films. Check out some manga from Japan. Check out just something from another culture, and you might be encountered with something familiar enough that you can relate to it, but a brand new twist. I'm
going to mention this at the end of the, when we get through our recommendations, or like what, made an impression on us vampire fiction wise. I'm going to talk about some books. So, if you're not into, watching film, there's a lot of
If you don't like motion features, read a book. So now that we've gone through folklore and myth and real life vampires, let's get into our recommendations.
Yeah, some of our favorite fictional.
Yeah. You go first.
Okay. So I would say this is one of my favorites and first impression of vampires.
Okay.
It's a soap opera called Dark Shadows.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So it's a vampire soap opera from the 1960s, created by Dan Curtis. Mm-hmm. He claimed to have, created the show because of a strange dream he had. And he and his wife then pitched it to ABC TV, and Dark Shadows was then a reality.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the vampirism didn't start at the beginning of the show. I think that came on later.
Yeah, correct. So it was ABC's first truly popular daytime soap. It found a niche in teenagers home from school in time to watch in the afternoon. It ran from 1966 to 1971.
Crazy.
The show has spun off into novel series and films, notably the 2021 film by Tim Burton. Mm-hmm. And comic books. In 1991, MGM produced a remake. It was a huge hit. And the problem was, it happened to coincide with the onset of the Gulf War. And so episodes were preempted. That led to a decline in ratings, and the show was canceled after one season.
Yeah.
Joseph Gordon-Levitt, a young Joseph Gordon-Levitt, was David Collins in the 1991 MGM remake. Yes.
Nice. That dude's in everything.
So we're big fans, JGL.
Yeah. He's the best.
Vampire. So the Dark Shadows of the 60s that I'm talking about, I watched it. I loved it. It was like you said, it started out, a governess named Victoria comes to the town of Collinsport, Maine, and she becomes a governess at Collinwood Manor. She starts to experience some strange things, and then about, I would say maybe a year or like half a year into the show, this strange uncle and cousin of the family shows up. Barnabas Collins. Barnabas Collins shows up, and he is played by Jonathan Freed. He arrives and introduces the vampire curse to the family. So once Barnabas is there, then things really start to get weird.
And that's when the show, I think, really took off, too. The ratings soared. And so if you're got a show that's flagging, pop a vampire in there.
It's known for its outlandish storylines, obviously. There were episodes that included ghosts and werewolves, zombies, witches, time travel. The actors in the show played many roles.
Yeah, Dan Curtis was like Ryan Murphy back in the day. He did these lavish gothic, horror tales. He later in 1974 did a really interesting version of Dracula with Jack Palance as Dracula. I remember that.
Not only did the actors play many roles, but some roles were played by multiple actors, as soaps do. So if you're at all familiar with how soap operas are, actors leave the show and then a new actor comes on to play the exact character. This happened as well.
And the child is a vampire.
And there was something like 475 episodes.
God damn.
So it was a wildly successful show. I loved it.
So set aside a couple of weeks.
I don't even know where you could stream it, to be honest.
I don't know about streaming, but I know every library I have ever been in
definitely has
the Dark Shadows collection. They've got them all on DVD. Yeah.
I mean, so if you
every public
really
library
want
has
something truly ridiculous,
it's wild.
A soap from the 60s with crazy plot lines and vampires, check out Dark Shadows.
That is an amazing recommendation. I knew you watched that as a kid, but I didn't see that coming. So my recommendations, I focused on a particular theme with mine, which are sort of what I'm calling alternative vampires. Not, like I said, not necessarily your Count Dracula type. To
get our listeners out of the box.
Yeah,
or
to give you a little something maybe you haven't experienced before. Oh, I see. I'm sorry I talked right over that. It was really good. Coffin.
I wish you could see my face right now.
It's in a rictus. So my first one is 1980. It's a film, 1987's movie Near Dark, directed by Catherine Bigelow. Oscar fame. Academy Award-winning master of thriller and action movies. Mm-hmm. Catherine Bigelow rules. She won for The Hurt Locker, I think.
Yes, she did.
Or maybe Zero Dark 30.
Nope, she won for The Hurt Locker.
She's just
She might
awesome.
have won for something else recently, too.
Well, Catherine Bigelow actually ties into, if you listen to our June recommendation episode, I recommended the book Aurora by David Koepp. Catherine Bigelow is directing an adaptation of that for Netflix. So that's coming up. Anyway, Near Dark it's awesome. It's like a rock and roll honky tonk rebel Western vampire movie. It takes place in, like a shit kicker type Texas town. Adrian Pasdar is, it's 1987, so he's young in this movie. He finds a sexy vampire, gets bit, she turns him, and he basically by default falls in with her coven of vampires, her group, led by the inimitable Lance Henriksen and Jeanette Goldstein, who are two just badass motherfuckers in this movie. Bill Paxton is a member also. It's like a lot of James Cameron regulars, because at this point, Catherine Bigelow, I think they were married or they were partners. This is only her second movie, but it's just like a hard drinking Western, kick-ass vampire movie. These vampires are not sexy. They're kind of scumbags. They're like white trash. There's an amazing scene where they take over a bar. And, you just really see their cruelty, but also like their kind of like Western style, like brawling. My one complaint about the movie is I honestly don't know how they've lasted this long. These vampires, they talk about being really, really old, but they're so chaotic and so anarchic that I'm amazed that they've lasted like a week. But
they probably just killed anybody that came after them.
pretty much. So this movie takes place over really a short period of time. Adrian Pasdar, gets turned. He joins this group, but he's really not into it. He can't murder anyone. He can't bring himself to do it, which would turn him into like a full-fledged vampire. It's notable for a couple of different reasons other than what I've already described. It's got a child character in it who is a vampire. Now, the book Interview with the Vampire had come out, but the movie had not at this point. So it was an early depiction of that struggle of being centuries old, but in the body of a child.
Interesting.
And, yeah, he's not happy about it. And the other thing is it treats vampirism in this movie like there's no supernatural element to it. It's all scientific. It's a disease. And in the movie, there's a cure. And it's pretty simple, but they do end up curing some of the vampires. So it's a lot of action. It's really high octane 80s style. If you were ever wondering what a James Cameron vampire movie looked like, this would be as close as you'd get. No disservice. And I don't mean that comparison as a disservice to Catherine Bigelow, who has her own style and her own incredible body of work. But it's that kind of vibe. It's like 80s action movie with vampires in it.
Nice. I have an 80s vampire movie also.
Oh, I think I know what it is.
So my next, again, this is, this isn't all, obviously we're not going to talk about the full catalog of vampire on film and TV.
Literally thousands and thousands.
Yeah. So many. But mine next is Fright Night.
Nice.
1985's
Excellent.
Fright Night.
Oh.
It was directed by Tom Holland. Not that one.
Not
everybody.
That one. Yeah. Relax. I don't think he was,
exactly. He wasn't even born.
He was not born yet.
And neither was I.
Yeah. Weird.
It stars Chris Sarandon. He was in Child's Play and he played Prince Humperdinck in The Princess Bride famously.
Well, and also famously
married to Susan Sarandon.
Yeah, ex-Susan Sarandon.
I get to it. That's how she got her last name.
It is. It is.
They're since divorced.
They are.
Roddy McDowall, who played Cornelius and Caesar in the original Planet of the Apes.
Oh, yeah.
And then William Ragsdale. He was in Justified as Gary Hawkins.
Nice.
He's a character actor.
Yeah. Oh, no, like you've seen him for sure.
So William Ragsdale's character is really sort of the main character of Fright Night. He was a teenager. He was super into horror movies, and his reclusive and mysterious neighbor, played by Chris Sarandon, moves in next door, and Ragsdale's character gets out his binoculars and watches everything he does, and he's convinced that his new neighbor is a vampire, and no one will believe him.
No one believes him.
No one believes him.
Yeah.
And
stop telling your crazy stories, kid.
He walks into his house once and he's saying he's a vampire. You guys, you have to do something about it, to his parents, and turning around. I'll never forget turning around in the easy chair in the living room is his neighbor.
Yeah.
And he's like, hello. So when strange things really start happening and no one will believe him, he goes to talk to a former TV vampire killer named Peter Vincent, who currently hosts a show called Fright Night.
That's Roddy McDowall.
That's Roddy McDowall's character. And they sort of team up to try to
and he's
slay the neighbor.
He has a persona on TV, kind of like a Vincent Price special, or Joe Bob Briggs, or Elvira type stuff.
Yep.
But he's a skeptic in real life. He doesn't believe the kid at first.
These are the facts the kid presents. I watched my neighbor with binoculars, so I've seen him carry in a coffin. I've seen him bite a woman and drink her blood. I've seen his teeth. And remember I mentioned one of my recommendations. These are not just fangs that come down. These are monstrous, full mouth.
Yeah. When Chris Sarandon goes
teeth.
Full vampire in the movie,
yeah.
It's the really good makeup and effects.
It's sort of the first funny, scary experience I had with a vampire movie, where it can be farce and fun, but it can also be scary.
I mean, one part of that movie I will never forget is when Roddy McDowall starts to believe and he goes to confront Chris Sarandon and he's holding a crucifix in front of him. His hand is shaking, and he's very afraid. And Chris Sarandon just grabs it with his hand and puts it down, and he tells him that doesn't work if you don't believe in it.
Yeah.
Which I thought was great because it's not, the power of those religious icons isn't that, you put two sticks together. It's that you have faith.
Yeah.
Which I thought was so cool.
It was like really fun to see.
It was a good arc for
represented.
Roddy McDowall's character also.
Absolutely.
But it's a great movie. It's funny, but it's like if Salem's Lot was a little bit less dark.
Yeah, if it was a little tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
And not
but Roddy
real.
McDowall is so iconic in that movie, and
absolutely.
Just the idea of like your new neighbor is a vampire and you have to go on an adventure to save your neighborhood. I mean, it's like my kind of Goonies, man.
Of course.
So my next recommendation.
Do tell.
This actually really ties in to your Atlanta vampire buddies.
Oh.
This is 1977's Martin, which was an indie film directed by the great George A. Romero. You probably know from his Living Dead series, and for essentially inventing the modern take on the zombie. So Martin is Romero, when he was alive, he called it one of his favorite movies that he had ever done. He shot it. The story is he shot it on $100,000, but he didn't want people to know that he could make a movie for so little, so he lied and said it cost him $250,000, just so he could get a budget out of the next person. So the story is there's a young man named Martin who is quite troubled. Now he believes he's a vampire. He can go out in the daytime. Crosses and holy water don't affect him. Garlic, none of those. Doesn't have any of the weaknesses. Doesn't have fangs. He murders people with a syringe full of drugs, and then he cuts their throats or their wrists and drinks their blood and leaves them to die. So he is sort of bounced around the system, and he moves in with like a distant relative named Kuda, who is an old Lithuanian Catholic. Owns this house, and the moment Kuda sees Martin, he knows there's something wrong with this kid, and Kuda actually starts to believe that he's a vampire. So in the house there's also Martin's cousin Christina, who is like a modern girl. She thinks Martin is troubled but not really a vampire. She fights with Kuda. So Martin, he gets a job. He calls into a local DJ and becomes sort of like a local celebrity, sort of, by, describing his vampire lifestyle. And he has these visions that the movie's in color. The visions are in black and white, that are of like witch trials and mobs. And
so like he's lived many
murder.
lifetimes?
Yeah, like he hallucinates. He's troubled. Romero plays it really, really close to the chest, whether there's something supernatural or not. I don't want to give away too much because the ending is unfucking believable. It ends in a way that I remember just gasping. My heart stopped. I was just frozen there, staring at the credits. That's that kind of ending.
That's amazing.
But Martin it's a low key movie. It's very effective. It's not necessarily scary in a frightening way, but it's really disturbing in its depiction of this troubled young man and the way he legit kills people. It's also it was Romero's first collaboration with Tom Savini, the special effects master, who would then go on to do the effects for Dawn of the Dead, and an early collaboration with Dario Argento and Romero.
Wow.
Argento edited Martin for Italy and overshot the Italian dubbing, and it was given a score by Goblin in Italy and released as Wampyr our favorite word.
Amazing.
Yeah. Shot on location in Pittsburgh, as all of Romero's movies were. And it was banned in the UK as part of their video nasties.
Oh, you told me about
Yeah.
this. Nice.
We're going to do a whole thing on video nasties another time, but that's just what they called their banned movies in the 70s and 80s. So Martin.
Awesome.
Check it out.
Yeah, I never even knew about
It's really good. It's an interesting
Sounds
watch.
good.
And it's gory. It's gross. So
Oh.
yeah.
Sounds less good. My last is also from 1980s. 1987's The Lost Boys.
Oh, excellent.
Boy, what an impression this movie made on me.
I'll bet
so
it
many
did.
reasons.
Yeah. I can think of a 6-pack of reasons.
Directed by Joel Schumacher. He also filmed St. Elmo's Fire, starring all those Brat Packers like Rob Lowe and Demi Moore. Flatliners with Julia Roberts and Kiefer Sutherland, who's also in Lost Boys. And Batman Forever.
Yeah.
And Phone Booth.
This was the scariest thing he did before he putting nipples on the batsuit.
But that's where you might know Joel Schumacher from.
Yeah, he did Tigerland with Colin Farrell.
Yeah.
He's sadly no longer with us, but he was a divisive filmmaker with a very distinct style.
He did have a distinct style, and it definitely came across in this film. This film stars Jason Patric, Corey Feldman from The Goonies, Corey Haim, R.I.P. Corey Haim. He was in License to Drive, Lucas, Dream a Little Dream. They're also collectively, Corey Feldman and Corey Haim, known as the Coreys.
Yeah.
Especially in the 80s and early 90s.
In the 80s, for
they
sure.
did like a reality show together before Haim passed.
That's when it got sad, though.
Yeah. And Jamie Gertz.
Yeah.
Also in it.
Oh, I had such a crush on her.
This also stars Diane Wiest and Edward Herrmann, who is Richard in The Gilmore Girls.
And Diane Wiest, who is a treasure.
Yeah, everybody knows who she is, I would hope. Schumacher was said this is one of the greatest casts he got together to make a film.
He's not wrong. It's a banger all the way through.
After I mentioned St. Elmo's Fire and Flatliners, I mean, those are really good casts too.
He always got, he got Val Kilmer and Clooney to put on a nipple suit, so the man had powers of persuasion.
Yeah, mistakenly. Jason Patric convinced Schumacher to consider Jamie Gertz as the character of Star, who was originally supposed to be a wayfish blonde. So very different.
Better that they went with Jamie Gertz.
I mean, she was great in it.
Yeah, she was awesome and beautiful.
It was filmed in Santa Cruz, California. It reached number 2 in the box office opening weekend, which is pretty impressive for a horror movie.
Especially back then, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the music is insanely, but guilty pleasurely good, you know? I mean, Thomas Newman wrote the original score, which is great. And the soundtrack has songs by In Excess. Echo and the Bunnymen covered the People Are Strange by the Doors.
So good.
It's so good. And the overall plot is that Michael, played by Jason Patric, and his younger brother Sam, played by Corey Haim, with their recently divorced mom, played by Diane Wiest, go to their grandfather's house in a beach town. They're basically moving in with him. They start to see missing people flyers all over. Michael becomes obsessed with Star, the Jamie Gertz character, and falls into the wrong crowd, essentially, led by Kiefer Sutherland. And meanwhile, his brother, Corey Haim, believes that the town's cursed, and he allies with some comic book nerds in town, and they decide to fight the evil of the town. Michael becomes a vampire. It's really dreamlike how it happens, actually.
Yeah.
I thought that the visuals of the transition into how Michael becomes a vampire was so cool.
Well, they do actually. This is one of the vampiric powers we didn't talk about, and they play it in this movie, is mesmerism.
Right.
The vampire's ability to mesmerize their mortal victims kind of Jedi mind trick them into lowering their inhibitions, following them, doing things they otherwise wouldn't do, just through the power of their Svengali stares.
Yeah, we did talk a little bit about the manipulative aspect of,
No, but there's like an almost like magician Cagliostro style to it, where they can,
you become
issue
psychically
suggestions.
linked. Essentially,
yeah, and it's a violation.
Oh, absolutely. It's like sucking your free will.
Interesting, yeah.
So Michael doesn't actually make the full transition because his brother helps save his soul, essentially. Edward Herrmann plays the head vampire, and
Spoiler.
again, some of those. I mean, it's like 30 years ago.
It's more like 40 years ago.
They also dispel some of those myths, like garlic and throwing holy water.
Oh, the other big trope that plays into this movie is vampires need to be invited into your home.
He was invited.
I know, and that a vampire can't enter a private dwelling uninvited.
Yeah.
So if you run into your home, you're safe. But if you run into a building with no owner, you're fucked.
But one trope we didn't talk about, which is kill the head vampire to end the vampire line.
There are billions of tropes. Yeah. But if you kill the sire, then in some myths, their children or fledglings will die, or they will revert back to human.
That's what Heyman and the comic brothers set out to do, essentially.
Yep. Yeah.
And then one other piece is Nanook the dog.
Oh, right.
The sweet, wonderful, protecting Malamute of the film.
It also,
beautiful dog.
This movie has maybe the greatest final line of any horror movie I've ever seen. Grandpa's line at the end.
Yeah. Gramps knew all along, by the way.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and
he knows that this existed in the town.
But that's not revealed.
No.
And it's just the closing line of the movie is just the best. It caps off a really entertaining ride in the best way.
You're not going to say
No,
it?
I'm not going to say the last line of the movie. Go watch the movie.
All right. Well, that's mine.
Definitely watch The Lost Boys. It's amazing.
What's your next one?
So my last one is one of my favorite books. It is, I've mentioned this author a few times, but I've deliberately not mentioned this book. So the author is Richard Matheson, and the book is
I know it.
I Am Legend, 1954. One of the classics of the genre, one of the classics of vampires, one of the classics of classics. I mean, this book it has been made into a movie 3 times. I've seen all 3, and I'll tell you, none of them come close to the book. And
so
none
just
of them
read the book. Is
just read the book.
Line. And usually that is always the bottom line.
It is just extraordinary. Richard Matheson is one of the all-time greats. So the story of I Am Legend is there's a plague that sweeps the earth and kills seemingly everyone except one guy, Robert Neville. Now, Robert Neville, when the book picks up, it's really about him living alone in a dead world and the routines that he gets into. And the biggest part of it is not so much collecting supplies, it's fighting off madness and loneliness. So in the book, he, during the day he travels around and he's trying to find nests. I'm sorry, I should back up a little bit. So this plague not only kills people, it brings them back as vampires.
Yikes.
Yes.
So this is the truly viral vampire.
Yes, exactly. Now, Robert Neville, during the day, travels and stakes these vampires when they're sleeping. So he's looking for nests. And he does this for years. Now, eventually, he finds another person, a young woman. He takes her in after some convincing. And a lot happens that I don't want to get into, but essentially the twist and the title of the book, I Am Legend, is Robert Neville, the last human on Earth, discovers that these vampires are evolving, that they're not necessarily all mindless, bloodthirsty creatures just going around killing everything, that they are evolving into thinking creatures, that they're starting a new society, and that he has become their boogeyman. That Robert Neville, the last man on Earth, is the legend. He's the story that vampires tell them, each other and their children, to scare them.
Wow, that's so amazing.
Yeah, so it's an all-timer of a twist. And now, like I said, it's been adapted multiple times into film. First time was in 1964, and I would argue this is the best of the three. In 1964, there was the movie Last Man on Earth, starring Vincent Price. It's pretty low budget, and you can tell, but a couple of things that this movie really does right. First off, it's Vincent Price.
Can't go wrong with Vincent Price.
I love Vincent Price. We're definitely going to do a Vincent Price episode at some point. But if you don't like Vincent Price, you're not going to like this movie, because like most Vincent Price movies, it relies heavily on his performance.
And guess what? Vincent Price also wrote a cookbook with his wife.
Amazing
so that
cookbook.
is also something that exists. So if you're not into horror, but you are into cooking, check out the Vincent Price cookbook.
Yeah, and he did a lot of film noir and stuff like that as well. But anyway, so this movie really gets his sense of isolation well, and it gets the horror of developing a routine that involves walking around dead bodies in the street and burn pits where the fires never go out.
Like a different type of missionary.
Yeah, it's kind of like
you're not bringing goodness. You're
but it's kind of like the Walking Dead does that pretty well, where it just shows how you get used to anything.
Right.
But
this is a new way of surviving.
It's definitely dated. It's one of those. It's like reading an old comic book where there's a voiceover of Vincent Price where he's basically narrating everything he's doing as he's doing it, because, you know,
that's how it was then.
Yeah, like the audiences really couldn't watch something like Castaway where it's just Tom Hanks being quiet for 45 minutes. So that's a little dated, but it is the closest to the book. This was remade again in 1971 as Omega Man, starring Charlton Heston. Now, this is not great. It's got its moments. It's a little bit more action-oriented, and it does feature one of the very first interracial love scenes with Rosalind Cash and Charlton Heston. And Charlton Heston fought to keep that. You know, it's worth it because it's got some good action. Rosalind Cash is really cool as the female survivor character that he meets. It has this really heavy-handed Christ analogy that is like, okay, I get it. And it's a little hammy. The last version of it is probably the one most people are familiar with, is 2007's I Am Legend with Will Smith. And this one bummed me out. It really did, because Francis Lawrence directed it. Great director. Will Smith, he's a talented actor. And with modern sensibilities, I thought they would really be able to get it right this time. But it's just a lot of CGI, bad CGI. It really misses the point of Neville's character not being the hero of the story. They make him the hero of the story. I guess they're developing a sequel where Will Smith just runs around New York slapping vampires in the face. No, but seriously, they are developing a sequel. I don't know if that's still in development. But
starring Will Smith?
It's just, starring Will Smith. So like just the fact that I Am Legend is getting a sequel shows you how wrong they got the story of I Am Legend. It's not supposed to have a sequel.
It's always a little frustrating when they put sequels on.
But my goodness,
don't have actual sequels.
Read the book. The book is tense. It's frightening. It offers an interesting commentary and twist on the vampire myth. Some great characterization. Robert Neville is a very sympathetic character, but he's not a great guy necessarily. You know, think about it. If you were alone for years, would you be polite? Would you be civil?
He doesn't trust anybody.
No. So Richard Matheson writes a very intriguing character, and it's fascinating how he reacts to the knowledge that he has become this legend. Read the book.
Well, as long as you have mentioned books, I am just going to talk about a few notable books that are some of my faves in the vamp world.
Is this our rapid fire?
No, this is just a little end note for some books. So The Passage by Justin Cronin.
Excellent.
It's actually a trilogy. It's a post-apocalyptic vampire future where vampires were created due to governmental experimentation.
Can I admit something?
Yeah.
I stayed up until
know.
like 3 a.m. the night before we got married because I couldn't stop reading that book.
Because I wanted you to read the book.
And when
I was like, it's so good.
When I told you that,
it.
you were excited.
I was like, yeah, isn't it amazing?
And I was like, we're definitely marrying the right people.
The essence of it is that this young girl is abandoned and in prison, and she essentially escapes to try to save the world. Another one which we mentioned in our Stephen King episode is Salem's Lot. So I'm not going to go into that too deeply, but that is certainly a notable book. Fledgling by Octavia Butler.
Oh, yeah.
It's about a 10-year-old girl who has amnesia, and she discovers that she's actually a 53-year-old vampire. So it's her sort of reacclimation and understanding of that and everything that comes with it. And then a book I haven't read but I thought I would bring up is Fever Dream by George R.R. Martin.
Right.
So
the riverboat vampires.
Yeah. So when he is not working on Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire, he is working on other novels, and this is one of them. So
and
I just wanted to give you some notable books to read if you were interested.
As his fans will know, he does spend a lot of time working on other things.
So for just our final wrap up, because we did just cover a very small area of vampires in TV and film. I think you mentioned a comic and a couple video games.
Yeah, I mean, these are stories that have been in human consciousness for thousands of years, and in the dawn of filmmaking, they've really dominated.
But we wanted to do a little bit of back and forth rapid fire.
Quick fire.
Where we bring up a couple of other notable vampire, fictional vampire movies and things of that nature, just to give you some more options.
This is a new segment we're calling Be Positive.
So do you want to start?
All right, rapid. That's what you say at the beginning of a month, right? When you want it to go fast.
Rabbit.
When you
right.
want it to go quickly, you go rabbit. Let the Right One In, 2008, Swedish film by Thomas Alfredson. Watch it. It's terrifying. Very, very good.
I would say Blade.
Oh, that was on my list.
Well,
1998.
Yeah. Blade.
Yeah. Blade 1, Stephen Norrington. Blade 2, Guillermo del Toro.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, definitely watch both of those. You can skip Blade 3 or watch it for morbid curiosity. Is it my turn?
Yeah.
2009, Daybreakers with Ethan Hawke and Willem Dafoe. Check that out.
Very nice.
It's like action horror. It's good.
What We Do in the Shadows?
The movie and the show?
Yes, both.
Taika
Waititi, and it's amazing. And I'm not going to... It's fun. It's funny. And I would say the first experience that I had of an actual... psychic vampire.
Oh, right. Colin Robinson.
Yeah.
And I would put the movie on par with Ghostbusters in terms of horror comedy quality.
Yeah, you got to watch the movie first, but the show is just, it can't be beat. And it just got another season.
2 seasons.
Yeah.
This is a weird one. 1986 movie called Life Force, directed by Tobe Hooper. That is, it's weird. It's a wild ride. Go with it. Stephen Railsback is quite memorable. Does spend a lot of time naked. Or maybe there's some weird nudity in this movie.
Already sort of mentioned just briefly is 30 Days of Night.
By Steve Niles and Ben Templesmith.
Yes, and it's very, very scary. I remember the ambiance of it was really frightening. Didn't we feel physically cold in the theater?
You're talking about
the
2007 David Slade film. Yeah, it was really good. Yeah, Josh Hartnett and Danny Houston.
Mm-hmm.
It's vampires take over a town in Alaska where it's dark for months.
Oh my God.
And it's
30 Days of Night.
Really cool premise.
It's amazing. It's so great because they come out to feed then, like they wait.
And they just go nuts.
Save up their stores.
Yeah, they don't have to hide.
It's like the Purge for vampires.
Yeah. So that's it.
No,
for me
I have another one.
For Rapids. Oh, go for it.
Midnight Mass.
Midnight Mass. Do you want to wrap it up with Midnight Mass?
Let's wrap it up.
I'm not going to top that.
I mean, it's just so unexpected.
On Netflix.
By
Mike Flanagan. Our hero, Mike Flanagan.
Who is just incredible. This show is incredible. There's so much to it. It's not just about vampires.
It's a beautiful exploration of small towns, of family, of Catholicism, of
It's
faith.
like scary and beautiful and emotional, and
Hamish Linklater gives a
spiritual.
career-making performance.
Just check it out. Yeah, we have to
Henry
end with
Thomas
that one. It's
is in
amazing.
it. Zach Gilford's in it. Kate Siegel.
Yep.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Midnight Mass, watch it. It's so scary and it's heartbreaking and beautiful as well.
So we didn't fully, go.
This is just the
To
tip
the
of the
full
fang.
extent, yeah.
It's the tip of the fang, people. We could talk
Check
about
out
vampires
anything.
for days and
Check
nights.
out any one of these, and you'll be definitely enraptured. So just check any one of them out. There's so many options.
You really can't go wrong. And even, honestly, the bad ones, they're fun too.
Yeah, watch whatever you like.
Yeah.
Or read whatever you like.
But we'll
but
probably
definitely listen to Terror in Tandem.
Oh, nice.
See you next time.
See you next time, everybody. Terror in Tandem is written, produced, and recorded by Laura and Richard Mathiasen, and edited and mixed by Richard Mathiasen. Our theme was written and performed by Carrie Denver, and all other music was written and performed by David Sispanik. All opinions expressed on this podcast are our own and should be taken as such. Thanks for listening, and please remember to give us a like, a review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time. We're standing right behind you.